The mansion on Lake Tahoe shook when Marcus's scream pierced the morning silence. He could see light for the first time in 8 years. Billionaire Alexander Sterling found both his blind twins with their eyes wide open, staring at the new housekeeper as if she were a divine apparition. But Lucy Foster harbored a devastating secret that would destroy everything. She wasn't a simple housekeeper. She was the neurosurgeon who 6 years earlier had caused the accident during delivery that had blinded the children. For years, she had secretly developed a forbidden experimental serum, risking prison and the twins' very lives to repair her fatal mistake. She had lived under false names, had sacrificed everything, career, identity, fortune, for this moment of redemption. When Alexander discovered that the woman who had saved his children was the same one who had condemned them to darkness, what happened shocked all of America. Because sometimes forgiveness is born from the deepest guilt, and love can bloom from the ashes of the most atrocious tragedy. The Sterling estate dominated Lake Tahoe like a crown jewel set against the Sierra Nevada mountains. 32 rooms of Italian marble and Waterford crystal that sparkled in the November California sun. But within those golden walls, darkness had reigned supreme for 6 long years. The twins Marcus and Matthew, who had just turned 8 a week ago, existed in a world without colors, without shapes, without the faces of the people they loved. The congenital blindness caused by complications during an emergency cesarean section was the curse that haunted Alexander Sterling, pharmaceutical industry magnate who had built a $4 billion empire but couldn't buy sight for his sons. The new housekeeper had arrived exactly 7 days ago. Lucy Foster, according to the impeccable documents she had presented, 32 years old, 10 years of experience with wealthy families in Switzerland, specialized in caring for children with disabilities. Her resume was perfect, too perfect perhaps, but Alexander was too desperate to ask questions. 23 housekeepers in 6 years, none had lasted more than 3 months. The twins weren't mean, but the frustration of being prisoners in darkness made them difficult, demanding, sometimes impossible. But with Lucy, it had been different from the very first moment. She had crossed the threshold of the mansion with a heavy suitcase that she wouldn't let anyone touch, and a look that seemed to carry the weight of the world. The children had accepted her immediately, as if they recognized in her something familiar, necessary. She treated them with an understanding that went beyond professional, anticipated their every need, calmed their every fear with a voice that seemed made of velvet and honey. What Alexander didn't know was that Lucy Foster didn't exist. It was an identity meticulously constructed over 6 years. In reality, she was Dr. Lucy Martinez, the former neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins who had performed that cursed emergency cesarean 8 years ago. The mother's massive hemorrhage, the split-second decision to save her first, the precious seconds lost, the hypoxia that had irreversibly damaged the twins' optic nerves, a 3-second judgment error that had condemned 2 lives to eternal darkness. Lucy had lost everything after that incident, her medical license revoked, reputation destroyed, professional identity erased. But instead of disappearing into nothing, she had done something both insane and magnificent. She had dedicated every single moment of the following 6 years to finding a cure. She had sold her penthouse in Manhattan, her luxury car, family jewelry, everything to finance clandestine research that official science would have deemed impossible. In her studio apartment in Newark, transformed into a secret laboratory, she had worked day and night on a serum based on modified neural stem cells and cutting-edge nanotechnology. She had studied every scientific paper on nerve regeneration, had corresponded under false names with researchers worldwide, had experimented on lab animals with similar neural damage. 6 years of manic obsession for these 20 minutes. That November morning, while Alexander was locked in his study managing a conference call with Japanese investors, Lucy knew the moment had arrived. The children were in the playroom, engaged with their sound toys that were the only way to explore the world. The heavy suitcase she had brought contained the culmination of 6 years of work, vials of serum that glowed with an opalescent light, micrometric precision syringes, a portable neurological monitoring device disguised as a tablet. Her hands didn't tremble as she prepared the doses. Years of emergency surgery had trained her to bury every emotion when lives were at stake. She told the children it was time for their special snack, the one that would make them feel better. She had won their absolute trust in a week, a record in the mansion. When they felt the small prick of the injection, they didn't even protest. The serum began to work after exactly 18 minutes. First, Marcus stiffened, his small hands flying to his eyes. It wasn't pain he was feeling, but a completely new sensation, as if someone had flipped a switch in a room that had always been dark. The cry he let out shot through the mansion like lightning, knocking precious Chinese porcelain from the cabinet, stopping every conversation, every activity. Matthew followed 23 seconds later, his pupils dilating and contracting in response to light for the first time in their lives. Both children were crying, but not from pain. They were crying from wonder, from amazement, from pure joy, as shadows and lights danced before their awakened eyes. Alexander abandoned the $20 million call without even saying goodbye, rushing into the room like a man possessed. The scene he found stopped him at the threshold, as if he had hit an invisible wall. His sons, his children condemned to eternal darkness by the world's best specialists, were looking at him. They were looking at him with eyes that sparkled with tears and wonder. The magnate, who had negotiated with presidents and prime ministers without ever losing his composure, collapsed to his knees, sobbing as he hadn't done even at the death of his wife Elena, who had passed from cancer 2 years earlier. He embraced his children while they touched his face, finally discovering what the daddy they knew only by voice and smell looked like. Lucy had retreated into the shadows, watching the scene with a mixture of infinite relief and growing terror. The serum had worked, but it was only the beginning. More doses were needed, continuous adjustments, constant monitoring, and sooner or later, Alexander would want to know how a simple Swiss housekeeper had accomplished a miracle that modern medicine declared impossible. Professor Bennett, the neurologist who had followed the twins from day one, arrived by helicopter in 47 minutes, bringing an entire medical team. The tests were frantic, incredulous, repeated 3 times because the results were simply impossible. The MRIs showed activity in visual areas that had been completely dead for 8 years. The optic nerves showed regeneration that contradicted every known law of neurobiology. Bennett kept muttering that it was impossible, that it must be a machine error, that there wasn't a single similar case in the entire world medical literature. But the children could see. Not perfectly yet, confused shadows and lights, but they could see. And their vision was improving hour by hour, as if the nerves were remembering how to function. That evening, while the twins slept exhausted from the most intense day of their existence, with electrodes attached to their heads to monitor brain activity, Alexander found Lucy on the terrace overlooking the lake. The full moon created a silver path on the water that seemed to lead to infinity. The man studied her in silence for long minutes. There was something about this woman that didn't add up. The posture was that of someone used to commanding, not serving. The hands were too well cared for to be those of a housekeeper, even a high-level one. And then there was the way she had handled the medical emergency, with a calm and competence that no childcare training could provide. Alexander asked her who she really was, but Lucy only replied that she was someone who wanted to help, that destiny sometimes puts people where they need to be. It wasn't time for the truth yet. First, she had to make sure the children were stable, that the treatment was complete. She had waited 6 years. She could wait a few more weeks. But as she looked at the lake under the moon, she knew she was falling in love with the man she had destroyed, and that, When the truth emerged, he would have to choose between the revenge he had every right to want and the love he had no right to refuse. The California night wrapped around them like a silk veil, hiding secrets that would soon explode with the force of an earthquake. The mansion that had witnessed so much darkness was about to become the stage for the most impossible love story America had ever seen. 3 weeks had passed since the miracle, and the Sterling estate was unrecognizable. The twins ran through the gardens chasing butterflies that had previously existed only in their dreams, painted with colors they discovered like explorers in foreign lands, devoured picture books with a hunger that was moving. Their vision was almost normal now, a recovery that the entire international medical community called inexplicable. Alexander had suspended all business activities, delegating everything to the board of directors to dedicate himself completely to his sons. But increasingly, his gaze rested on Lucy, studying her, trying to decipher the enigma of this woman who had brought light into his home. She continued to live as a housekeeper, refusing any offer of reward or change of status.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
But every night, she locked herself in her room for hours, and strange glows filtered from under the door. It was fate, or perhaps inevitability, that led Alexander to discover her. Sleepless from the excitement of recent days, he was walking through the mansion when he saw the light in Lucy's room. He knocked without response, then entered. The scene he found froze the blood in his veins. The room was transformed into an improvised laboratory. Professional microscope, test tubes, syringes, chemical formulas scrawled on papers. But it was the medical files open on the table that hit him like a punch to the stomach. At the top, clearly legible, his children's names and the date that had marked his life. November 15, 2016. Emergency cesarean section, severe neurological complications. The confrontation that followed was devastating in its simplicity. Lucy confessed everything without trying to justify herself. She was Dr. Martinez. She had caused the twins' blindness, had spent 6 years developing the cure, had entered the mansion with false documents to repair her mistake. Alexander oscillated between murderous fury and infinite gratitude. Two emotions so opposite they seemed to tear him apart. The anger at the lie, the deception, the audacity of experimenting on his children without permission clashed with the undeniable evidence. His children could see. Lucy had risked everything, freedom, life, everything, to make amends. She hadn't fled, hadn't hidden, had faced her mistake in the most difficult way possible. In the end, Alexander asked her to stay at least until the treatment was complete. There was too much at stake to let pride or anger interfere, but something had changed between them, an electric tension made of attraction and repulsion, of hate and something dangerously similar to love. The following weeks were a delicate dance of unspoken emotions. Alexander watched Lucy with the children, saw the genuine love in her every gesture, the devotion that went beyond any sense of guilt. The twins adored her, with an intensity they had never shown for any other maternal surrogate figure. They called her Aunt Lucy, but in their drawings she always appeared next to Daddy, as if the unconscious recognized a truth that reason denied. The attraction between Alexander and Lucy grew like an inevitable tide. They found themselves seeking each other's gaze during meals. Their hands brushed when both reached for the same object. They conversed late into the night about everything except the elephant in the room, the fact that she had destroyed and then saved his family. It was during an exceptional December snowfall that everything changed. The children had insisted on building a snowman, the first they could see. As they watched them play from the panoramic window of the living room, Alexander turned to Lucy and confessed the unthinkable. He was falling in love with her. It was pure madness. They both knew it. How could he love the woman who had caused the greatest tragedy of his life? Yet it was precisely what she had done afterward The sacrifice, the dedication, the miracle that made the impossible possible. Lucy had dedicated 6 years to making amends, had given up everything, had risked prison and worse. She hadn't fled as anyone would have done. She had faced her mistake in the most difficult and courageous way possible. The kiss that followed was as inevitable as the sunrise. It contained forgiveness and passion, gratitude and desire, the end of a nightmare and the beginning of something completely new and terrifying at once. A love born from the ashes of pain, but no less real or powerful for it. The clandestine happiness lasted exactly 1 month before the house of cards began to collapse. Professor Bennett, during a routine checkup, noticed anomalies in the children's blood tests that made him suspicious. Traces of unknown substances, genetic markers altered in ways science couldn't explain. He began investigating with the tenacity of a bloodhound. Research on Lucy Foster revealed that identity had existed for only 6 months. Digging deeper, the truth emerged. Dr. Lucy Martinez, neurosurgeon, stripped of her license for gross negligence during a cesarean section. The dates matched perfectly. The Sterling twins had been her victims. When Bennett presented the evidence to Alexander, expecting shock and fury, he was stunned by the billionaire's calm response. Alexander knew everything, had chosen to protect Lucy, and if necessary, would lie to the entire world for her. Love had won over hate, forgiveness over revenge. But there was a bigger obstacle on the horizon. Margaret Sterling, Alexander's mother, matriarch of the family and the pharmaceutical empire. The woman who forgave no weaknesses was coming from her estate in the Hamptons to meet the miraculous housekeeper all of America was talking about. Margaret had built the empire alongside her late husband with an iron fist and infallible intuition. She wouldn't be easy to fool. Margaret Sterling arrived like a hurricane on a sunny morning. 72 years worn with the elegance of a queen and the hardness of a general. She scrutinized Lucy with eyes that seemed like X-rays, seeing through every pretense. Lunch was a masked interrogation, every question a trap, every observation a test. When little Marcus innocently revealed that Daddy always kissed Lucy when he thought no one was watching, Margaret exploded. The argument with Alexander was epic, shouts that crossed through solid oak doors. How dare he get involved with the help? And just now, when the children were so vulnerable. But for the first time in his life, Alexander stood up to his mother. He loved Lucy. The children adored her. She was part of the family now. Margaret, furious, promised to discover the truth about this woman, and she kept her promise. It took her investigators just 3 days to unearth everything. The final confrontation was volcanic. Margaret brandished the documents like weapons, accusing Lucy of being a manipulative monster who had caused the tragedy, only to then pretend to be the savior. But it was Lucy's response that surprised her. She admitted everything, accepted every accusation, but also reminded her that she had restored sight to Margaret's grandchildren when the entire world had declared it impossible. Margaret's ultimatum was brutal. If Alexander married this woman, she would disinherit him. He would lose everything. Alexander's response was equally clear. He would gladly lose the empire, but not Lucy. It was then that the twins intervened with the disarming logic of innocence, explaining to grandmother that if it hadn't been for the initial mistake, Lucy would never have entered their lives, and they would have remained blind forever. Margaret, for the first time in her life, was speechless. She really looked at Lucy, seeing not the monster she had imagined, but a woman who had sacrificed everything to repair a mistake. The embrace that followed surprised everyone, accompanied by the warning that if she hurt the family again, she would destroy her. It was conditional acceptance, but it was a beginning. Spring brought the final medical confirmation. The twins were completely healed. Perfect, stable, permanent vision. A medical miracle that would rewrite the textbooks. But the real miracle was celebrated in the mansion's garden 6 months later. When Alexander and Lucy married, surrounded by blooming wisteria, and the twins throwing rose petals they could finally see in all their splendor. All of America followed the story of impossible redemption, of forgiveness that had won over hate, of love born from tragedy. During the ceremony, Marcus and Matthew read a poem they had written, speaking of the angel dressed as a housekeeper who had brought light into their darkness. There wasn't a dry eye among the guests. Margaret, transformed by the evidence that miracles can be born from mistakes, danced with her grandchildren under the stars they could now see, teaching them the constellations with a gentleness no one had ever seen in her before. She had accepted that sometimes destiny takes tortuous paths to reach happiness. 5 years later, the culminating moment arrived in Stockholm. Lucy Sterling was receiving the Nobel Prize in Medicine for developing the neural regenerative therapy that had saved not only her children, but thousands of children worldwide. On stage, with Alexander and the teenage twins in the front row, she thanked the two boys who had taught her that there are no irreparable mistakes, only opportunities for redemption. The twins, now brilliant 13-year-olds with dreams of becoming doctors, applauded until their hands hurt. They had learned the deepest lesson, that light is more precious when you've known darkness, that forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, and that true love isn't the one born perfect, but the one that grows from imperfections. The epilogue of this story doesn't take place in Stockholm's golden halls, but in the Sterling estate kitchen, years later. Lucy makes breakfast for the extended family. Besides the now 16-year-old twins, Anna and Sophia have been born. Marcus and Matthew tease her about her always burned eggs, reminding her that she's saved thousands of lives but can't cook. She laughs, hugging them, these boys who were her damnation and her salvation. Outside the window, Lake Tahoe sparkles in the morning sun, the same sun that years earlier had illuminated the moment when two blind children had opened their eyes for the first time. The housekeeper who had changed everything was no longer a housekeeper. She was a mother, a wife, a savior, a Nobel laureate. But above all, she was living proof that sometimes we must fall to the lowest point to rise higher than we ever imagined. The Millionaire's twins were blind until the new housekeeper did something that changed everything. That something wasn't just an injection of experimental serum. It was the demonstration that true love isn't the one that ignores mistakes, but the one that transforms them into miracles, and that sometimes, just sometimes, from the deepest darkness can be born the brightest light. Click. Like if you believe in the power of redemption and forgiveness. Comment with the moment that touched you most. Share to celebrate all those who transform mistakes into miracles. Subscribe for more stories of rebirth and unconditional love. Sometimes the greatest guilt can become the most beautiful salvation. Sometimes who hurts us is also who heals us. And always, always, love finds its way even in the deepest darkness.